Hey everybody, Joe here. Welcome to Live Sound 1, 2, and 3. Just wanted to do a little intro just to let you know what's going to happen in these videos. Basically going to take anyone from a stone cold beginner that's got a really low budget PA up to an intermediate that has a $10,000 PA. From on the street corner to a medium-sized club, the principles apply no matter what as far as obtaining good live sound. So hopefully you get something out of it and enjoy it and have some fun, and let's get right to it. All right, part one, the mixers, where it all begins. All right, let's start with what's no doubt the most common type of mixer, a passive mixer. What it does is it takes the microphones and signals from the instruments and mixes them and sends them out to amplification, which then is sent out to speakers. This is absolutely the most common type. There are digital and there are analog. We're going to stick with analog for now because we're kind of dealing with basic to intermediate mixing and sound reinforcement. So what you've basically got here is a repetition of the same controls over and over again. It looks complicated, but it's really not. So let's break it down. Okay, so each one of your instruments or microphones goes in the top and the inputs. Pretty simple. You've got XLR. And then you've also got usually some kind of a 1/4 inch for an instrument level like a keyboard. You got your gain. This sends the main amount of juice down into the channel strip. And then you may have compression, and that is a form of volume control, and we'll talk about that later. And then you generally have some sort of EQ. This one happens to just have a simple 3-band EQ, bass, treble, mid-range. Possibly some effects if you can put effects into the board or it has it on it. And then you've got your pan. You either go all the way right, all the way left, or somewhere in between. Then whatever signal you've mixed up there, you send over to the main bus, and then that's the same setup on pretty much all of them, except for when you run out of these XLRs on top, you're only going to have jacks, and that's generally going to be so you can put some sort of a stereo device in there like a keyboard or some other kind of a thing. And they may not have some of the controls the others have, like the gain control or the compression, because the device itself may have that on it already that you're putting into the board. So otherwise, they're all the same. So then they head over here to the main bus and they go out, and they are sent out through there into your amplifier and speakers. And that's basically every mixer. Next up is a powered mixer. And a powered mixer is basically the same layout as a passive mixer, except for the fact that it is powered. In other words, you don't send the board out into an amplifier and then in the speakers. You just send this into the speakers. So it's got the amp built in. It's kind of convenient. They generally tend to be small, lower powered, but they're great for small gigs. Sometimes they're really handy. I've used them many times. They can be really cool. It's a super handy modular unit, and it's got the amp built in. And the final spin on your basic mixture is all of them. Mixture is right. It's a mixer, amp, and speaker all in one. You see these a lot with duos or someone doing a solo act where they don't need a lot of inputs and they don't need a lot of volume. They just need to get above the crowd slightly. And it's just the mixer, amp, and speaker all built into one. So that's a cool option also. All right, class, romper room is over with. I did say we were going to do basic, but now we're going to get into the meat of the thing here. So, all right. Let's go over a channel strip. This is how you set up a channel, okay? You plug something in. You plug in, say, for instance, a microphone, typical, with an XLR cable, typical. It's a noise-canceling cable, and we don't really need to get into the technology of it, but it rejects noises that you don't want in the line. If you plug something into the line level, and it's a very long, basic cable, like a guitar-type cable, an instrument cable, you could get noise in it. With something like this, you won't typically get noise in it. Very difficult. You might not get noise in this, but if it's a real long cable, it basically turns into an antenna, and there's all kinds of bad things that can happen. So if you do plug something in here, try to keep it as short as possible. All right, now let's talk about direct boxes. And the reason I'm talking about direct boxes is what I said before. If you put a long cable, like say a guitar cable or a cable from some sort of like guitar modeler or something like that, and it doesn't have an XLR out. Now, most of them are going to have it, but some won't. Or if you're just trying to put your, say, for instance, a little pedal board or something right into the board and you're going to go in a line in, you can do that. If you like the way it sounds, hey, good on you. Some of these have like a reduced or increased gain level, and it's showing you that you can do a guitar into it, and all that. And sometimes that'll work out okay for you. But one thing it won't do is it won't get rid of the fact that if you've got a long guitar cable coming in here, interference can get in that line. So I don't generally tend to ever use these things. If you're going to put something like that in, use a direct box. And this is a real nice one, but you can get them cheap. It doesn't have to be super expensive. This just happens to be, I just like it because it's made in the United States in Chicago. But anyways, so you've got, this one's a little fancy. It's got a left and a right, and it's got a few other things. But the important part to know about this thing is that what it does is it takes that line level and it turns it into an XLR out. Okay, so you get what they call a balanced signal. And without getting too technical, basically they're sending the signal through this line, splitting it up, flipping part of it around, and then when this thing puts it back together, it rejects anything that wasn't there in the first place. It sounds complicated, but it's really not that bad. You don't have to even worry about it. It just does what it does. And this box stays up by you. You plug your thing into it, your guitar or whatever, and then run a long XLR cable. Instead of going into one of these, you go into a, not into a line in, you go into the XLR instead. And that way you avoid the issue we were talking about of having a problem with becoming an antenna. And now you can run 1,000 feet of XLR cable from this box up to your board, and you get the clean signal that you're looking for. All right, let's talk about phantom power. See that mysterious phantom button there? It says 48 volts to mics. Generally it says that, or it might say phantom, but what that does is it powers microphones that need power. And generally speaking, those are condenser microphones. You might have some of those on the stage. Somebody may have them. Somebody may want them. You might want it. You might even use it for a vocal mic. It's unusual because they're a little more delicate. You can't bang them around. They're not like a dynamic mic like a SM58 or your typical microphone that you'd see on a stage. But they are present, and you do have to have power to them. Now, when you turn on most boards like these smaller boards, it's going to go to every single one of the inputs on the board, okay? And that's generally not a problem. For like an SM58, 57, just about any mic, it's not going to hurt it to have phantom power on. So you generally don't have to worry about that. Some very rare instances of like certain ribbon mics and stuff, it can blow them up. But you'll know if one of those is around because somebody's going to tell you about it. So another thing is sometimes somebody will have outboard gear. Like I'm talking with phantom power on right now. I'm talking on a Rode NT1A, and it needs phantom power. But as you can see, I'm going through this board. As you can see, the VU meters. But I don't have the power on. That's because I got an outboard piece of gear. I got a little micro mechanic over here, and it's got phantom power on it. It's sending 48 volts to this microphone. Now, I like it because it's just got a cool EQ profile. I just like the way it sounds. It's not really doing anything. But if I turn on the phantom power on this at the same time, and this is plugged into a board that's already getting 48 phantom power from that piece of outboard gear, it's not going to hurt it. Watch. I turn it on. It doesn't do anything. It's not going to give it like 96 volts or anything like that. It won't do that. It's just going to ignore it, really. So you don't have to worry about it if someone else has phantom power going into the board already. It's not going to hurt anything. So that's phantom power. Pretty simple. Okay, so once this comes into here, you need to send power to it. Watch, I'm going to turn the power off. Okay. So now I turned that down all the way. This is basically your initial volume. They call it the gain, and you want to have that up pretty good. There's a little zero usually, or a notch, and it'll say unity or a U or something, and that's unity gain. And that just is basically saying you're not adding anything and you're not subtracting anything from the signal. It's the basic raw signal that's coming from whatever you're sending. Okay, and you kind of want to keep it that way because if you turn it down low and then turn it back up down here, then it's a lot like this. You've got a little tiny radio signal, and you put a microphone up to it, and you want to get that thing loud as you can, but you try to turn it up on your mixer by hitting the fader and bringing it up, and all you're doing is bringing up noise around the radio, and it sounds like complete butt. That's the principle, basically. We talked about how a lot of these things will have some sort of like on a radio, bass, mid-range, and treble. And that's exactly what this is, like, see, now the bass is way down and the bass is up and I sound like a radio announcer. So let's talk EQ. Okay, let's go over this EQ thing.
if you notice here on this EQ, on this little Behringer, they have told you which frequencies you can cut and boost. So like if you had like a guitar amp or something, or a car stereo, and you've got these kind of controls, that's generally what's going on. They've given you a certain frequency band you can cut and boost because they found that, generally speaking, those are the best ones to cut and boost to give you pleasing sounds and to eliminate things like feedback and rumble and high screaming, obnoxious highs. So you can cut and boost those 15 either way, 15 dBs one way or 15 dBs the other way, and that's all you can do, just those frequency ranges. And and what happens is that takes a big sweep. It's not just exactly those frequencies that you're cutting, and that's what's called your angle of Q. And in other words, they might have, say this is 650. It says right there, you're going to cut and boost 650, but you're also going to cut some of the frequencies around it on like a bell curve to a certain size. That's the angle of Q. So it could be a really wide one, and with a real parametric EQ, if you've seen one, like maybe on a digital mixer or something, you can adjust how wide that is, and you're really sweeping. I mean, you're taking chunks out. When you're turning that thing, it sounds like a wah, wah, wah. But as you get it down narrower and narrower, they'll narrow it a little bit. It'll be closer to just that one frequency that you're cutting and boosting, so you don't get as crazy of a wah-wah sound, basically. So if you turn to, 650 and you turn this up and you're getting screeching, howling feedback, that might be where your problem is. But you don't want to have to go through each one. So you do what you call a sweep, and that's why they call it a sweepable mid-range. So what you do is you're getting feedback, okay? You turn this thing all the way down, okay? Now, you're on 650 and the feedback hasn't gone away. Sweep around, and then all of a sudden the feedback starts to go away and you're at 2K. Okay, well, you know that's where your problem is at. You've turned it down and you're on 2K and the feedback went away. Good. All right, now, what you've done is you've cut 15 dBs around 2K. That's kind of drastic, but at least it got rid of your problem. So now you don't need to do that. What you do then is turn this back up a little bit, just until the feedback doesn't come back, and then you don't lose this 2K and then everything around it as drastically. See what I mean? So, because if you just left it all the way down here, you've just chunked down a big piece of your signal, and it's going to sound muffled and weird. So you turn it back up until the feedback, is tamed, but, on the verge. No, get rid of it. I mean, if you have to, you have to. This is drastic cutting. But if this is all you have to adjust EQ with, then this is what you do. Okay, it might not sound that great, and you may have to adjust other things to kind of help compensate, because these are the same way. Whatever they've set these for, it's not going to be exactly at that low frequency range they've chosen or that high frequency range they've chosen. There's going to be an angle of Q there too. So you might be able to add a little something back here that you've cut that wasn't really feeding back, but you've had to cut here by adding a little more high, say for instance, and that's really typical. All right. So, and if your problem was lower down, around like 250 or something like that, and it can happen, and you've done a pretty drastic cut, you may be able to get back some of the stuff that you cut by turning the bass up a little more, and that's also potentially typical. And these are in between the gain and the output, so just keep in mind that they're actually part of the gain stage itself. So, break screech. Quick edit here. The biggest reason I'm telling you that is because let's say you're in the middle of the gig and one or more things doesn't have something, not enough effects, not enough bass, whatever it might be, and you start turning those things up. Keep in mind, your meter over here, you might start peaking because you're adding signal. Even though you're not turning up the gain or the level, like I said, you're adding signal. So just keep that in mind. That's very important once the gig is going, And a lot of boards will have a solo button. You can solo each one and, adjust them and make sure each one of them isn't peaking. But still, when you turn it all back on, make sure that you're not peaking over here. So you may have to turn your level down, your main level down. Just keep an eye on that, and remember that affects the overall gain. And then you've got effects, and sometimes they're sent in. Now, they could be sent in on this board, and I can bring in outboard effects like some sort of reverb or something and add them to each of these channels if I want to. So this is what would turn that up. And then you've got aux, which is generally going to say either aux or like monitor out. And what that does is it'll take each individual one of these channels and send it out to the monitor mix where you could hear it on the stage. Okay, pretty simple. Then you've got pan, and of course you can hear what that is. We're going from left to right, and somewhere in between. Excuse me. So you would set up what you'd call like a stereo image on the stage, where you might have one guy over here, one guy over here. You may split it. Now, you might be running a mono rig. You might be going mono on stage, and then you just leave it in the middle. But if you want to set up a stereo image, then that's what you'd use that for. Okay, and now here is your level out. And basically what that does is it takes the sum of all that you did here, including the effects. If you put effects in here, they can actually add to the gain too. So always keep watching this, your meter, and make sure you're not clipping. And then at that point, if you've got everything out, if you got it on Unity and it sounds good, and you're not, quite where you need to be over here, you can turn this one up a little bit and send more signal out. Now, here's an important point when you're setting up each one of your channels. This is critical. You have to make sure that you get whoever's going through whatever channel it is to hit as hard as they're probably going to hit for the whole evening, and set your level from there. Make sure it doesn't peak. Now, they'll come down in volume at certain points in time, as the dynamics change around. You got to make sure that in advance you have set it up so that it's not going to peak when they get super boisterous. So that's really an important point of gain staging. Okay, so that covers your individual gain staging on each one of your channels. Now they all go out to the Mixbus or the mains, whatever you want to call it, over here. And obviously make sure that, and summed up, they're not peaking, obviously. So you get the whole band to play. So that all comes out of your mains on the top here. I've got mine right here, and they go out to your audience. And then on your aux, they'll go to the monitors and just get those adjusted correctly. And that's always a lot of fun, and we'll talk about that later. But they come out of the monitor out. So now you can hear yourself on stage if you've got monitors running, which you generally are going to have. So there's really the whole ball of wax getting mixed together. All right, let's talk about compression. I said I would, so let's do it. Compression is, like I said, basically a type of volume control. And what it does is, if a signal's coming in and it gets too boisterous, like some crazy, like some crashing overhead cymbal, or a snare that's just getting out of control, or a vocalist who just doesn't have good mic technique, he's too loud at certain points, and he may tend to clip. We're talking about keeping an eye on this meter over here and making sure that it's not clipping, because clipping's bad and sounds awful, and if you're recording, you can't get rid of it. Okay, so what this will do is it'll take the signal, and if it gets to a certain point, it'll chop it down a certain amount, and within a certain amount of time. There's a whole lot to it, but these are generally set to a specific ratio, they call it. And I'm not going to get into that in this video, but I do have a video out there you can watch that talks about it in depth, so you can check that out. But basically all it does is it just says, hey, if this gets super loud, cut it down for, X amount of time, a little bit, just grab it and pull it down real quick so it doesn't screw up the recording, and then it'll ease back off and let it go back to where it was before. That's exactly what compression is. It's all it is. It can get really complicated. You got attack and release and knee and all this kind of crazy stuff. But basically these are just, I don't want to call it a toy, but it does actually compress. It will compress the signal, and it can be helpful on a lot of these boards. This one has it, and this is a really cheap board. This is a nicer board, but it's not a great board, but it doesn't even have compression on it. I guess they just decided that that's just not something they're going to get into on this type of a board. And I have other boards that have it on it, and I use it. But when we get into other pieces of gear, like outboard gear, when we get into amplification and so forth, I'll show you compressors and, different things that, can help with the overall signal and take everything and make it all kind of like stay within a certain range and more or less glue it together. But just thought I'd talk a little bit about compression because I said I would, so I did. There you go. Another important setting in your gain staging and just in your general setup of a channel strip is the low cut. Now, the low cut is usually right underneath the gain knob. And what it'll do is it'll cut under a certain frequency level. Generally speaking, it's going to be 100 or 80 or something like that. And what that does is it cuts out anything under that frequency level. And that's generally the kind of level that's boomy, like pound, pound on the floor, pounding, foot stomping on the stage, or bleed over from like a kick drum into a nearby microphone that you don't want it in. Like even the snare mic, you wouldn't necessarily want. I would hit the low cut on the snare. I'd hit the low cut on any drum that didn't go under, a certain frequency. That way, that frequency is not bleeding over into that channel and defiling the signal. And I'd put it on all my microphones because very few people sing under 100 hertz. I put it on just about everything except maybe the kick, the bass, anything that goes really low. I engage that. It just cuts down on stage rumble. Super important. Low cut. Okay, earlier on I was talking about how you may be having a signal level problem with someone in particular. Let's just say it's the keys in this case, okay? And I was talking about how you could single them out and adjust. So everyone's all set here, and these are the keys, let's just say. And you could single them out and adjust maybe their EQ or whatever you might need to adjust on them. And you want to listen to just them and see what their levels are. You'd need to have this function. That's a pre-fade listen. They have different names for it, but generally speaking, it's going to be like, somewhere where you single them out. There's going to be a few names for it, okay? And you press that, and what you're hearing in your headphones mix as, the front of house guy is going to be just them. And what you're going to see on your meters is just going to be just this channel, so you can get them to where they need to be if something seems to be going out of whack, whether it be adjusting their EQ, getting some feedback out of them, or whatever. And what it does is it makes it so you can make sure that their signal's not too hot by seeing it on the meters by itself. That's really all it is. It doesn't turn it off to the front of house or anything. Everyone still hears them. They may or may not still be in the monitors when you do that. They probably are. It depends on where your monitors are on the fade, but it's definitely going to most likely be in the monitor, so they can still hear themselves. And then you can do all your adjustments there, and then just punch it back in, and now you're hearing the whole mix again on your headphones. And that's pre-fade listen. Okay, now it's time to talk about a subject that a lot of people get confused on, and that's subgroups. Now, most of your boards are going to have something like main. They're going to be able to send the signal to the main. You can take it off. You can put it on. Some aren't going to have it. Some are just going to go straight out. Now, others, like this one, have a subgroup. And this can be confusing for people. Well, what's this subgroup for? Okay. Normally, let's say you're going to have, almost always, it's going to be like a drum kit or a horn section or some background singers on several channels. Let's just say it's a drum kit right now. I've got the drum kit all set up. I've got my levels right. I know he could peak. I might even have some compression on it, but I've got it all set up. I could send her the mains, and then at a certain point in the performance, I may need to lower the drums a little bit. And if you got a big hand like me, you can ride these faders, as they say, and you can move it around, but you're going to mess up your settings a little bit, generally speaking. So the solution for this is a subgroup. Put the drums on a subgroup. So you've got your drums all set up. Everything's correct. Now, instead of sending them to the mains, take them off the mains and send them to a subgroup. Some mixers have multiple subgroups. This one just has one, but it gives you the idea. Sub. Now, he's not going to the mains. He's going to the subgroup. But you can set the subgroup to go to the mains. Now, once you get the level straight on that, you can turn him up and down, and it turns up and down all 5 of these faders, the entire drum kit, or however many's on it. You can put as many as you got channels for. And that's just a simple way to take a group of people or horns or a drum section, a drum kit and some percussion or whatever it is, and group it all together on one fader so that you can adjust that level. Simple as that. A lot of mixing boards, even some of your budget ones, are going to have one of these on it, a graphic EQ. And it's very limited in what frequencies are available to raise or cut. But my advice is, generally speaking, if you're hearing something weird or you're not hearing enough of something or you're hearing too much of something's fine. Cut it. If you're not hearing enough of something, your initial reaction is to, oh, it's not bright enough. Push that up. And you'd be surprised at how badly you can mesh up your sound doing that. So just be very judicious. I mean, a dB, And another thing to do is, this is another good piece of advice, cut around it. So if you're not hearing enough of this, maybe bring down these guys just a tiny bit. You might find that it sounds better. Maybe it's just being overpowered. The frequency band, remember we talked about that before, is blending over into this one, and you can maybe get some of that out of there, and this one takes over a little bit and sounds a little better. You might need to still boost it a little. But my advice on these is be very judicious in their use, if at all. But if it's all you got, you have to use it if you need to sculpt the sound and something's really out of whack as far as your whole mix. You've done your best to get everybody else dialed in EQ-wise, but the overall sound just needs a little massaging. It can be handy. I've used it. I would use it, and I generally do a little bit with it. One of the times it can be super handy, though, is if you're just getting a feedback that you just can't, spend the time, you're in the heat of the moment, something's feeding back, and you just can't solo every single channel and see who's the offender. You generally know who it is, but you can use this to just go really quick, just cut 2.5 or cut 250 or whatever it might be, or 4, you're somewhere near there, and just see if you can, carve out that feedback until you can get to a break or a place where you can, get a second to figure out what's feeding back. So sometimes it can be a lifesaver in that respect if it's sent to the monitors. This one can be sent to the mains or the monitors. It's your choice. Some of them have both. A lot of them do. So that's my advice on one of these guys.
Okay, if I could play Jaws music right now, I would. Dun, I don't want to get copyright strike. This is one of the most dreaded buttons. It can be your friend, but it can be your enemy. The mute button. The dreaded mute button. When a channel is out, man, or something's not playing, the frustration it can cause. And it can be just one channel, or it can be on a lot of boards like this one, it could be a whole group, like a subgroup, or a monitor, or the mains, and someone has accidentally pressed the mute button. Man, I have seen that frustrate people, and it's just such a simple thing, but in the heat of the moment, you don't see that little light, or someone doesn't know any better, just look for the light. Might save someone's life. All right, well, that wraps it up for mixers. Hope you got a lot out of it. I gave it my best shot. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I have been known to do follow-up videos to cover things that I might have missed. Other than that, head on over to the next video. It's going to be on amplifiers, and then the next video is going to be on speakers, and we'll wrap the whole thing up. And keep in mind, I'm going to have time stamps so that if you're looking for something specific, you could use these as a reference. It's kind of like my other series is on some of the Tascam stuff. So hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one.